Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Palm Springs Art Museum's virtual program. Today, we are here for an exhibition virtual preview of Pure, Simple, and Beautiful Forms, Glass from the Collection. We are going to have a virtual tour and talk with our special guests, Catherine Huff and Richard Whiteley, and I look forward to introducing them in a moment. I'm Rochelle Steiner, Chief Curator and Director of Public Programs and Education here at the museum. Before I introduce everybody, I would first, however, like to make an announcement on behalf of the entire museum. Tonight, we acknowledge Steve Maloney. The Palm Springs Art Museum regrets to inform you that our beloved chair, Steve Maloney, passed away Tuesday evening. Everyone at the museum, from the board to the staff to volunteers, is devastated and heartbroken by this news. Steve was extraordinarily passionate about the Palm Springs Art Museum. At the core of his efforts was a determination to serve as a guiding force in maximizing the benefits the museum could bring to the community and to its visitors. There's a tribute about Steve in our special issue of E-News today, which went out just a few hours ago. The museum is working with the Maloney family and will be sharing details on ways to honor Steve in the days ahead. On behalf of the entire board and staff, we would like to recognize a moment of silence in honor of Steve and in memory of him at this time. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you so much. Tonight, we continue our virtual program series. And as you can tell, for each event, I'm in a different gallery here in the museum. This is a way that, though we are closed, we are able to bring you with us inside the space until you're able to join us again. We do hope that that will be this spring. We are waiting news from the state of California and Riverside County when we will be able to open again, hopefully soon, given the good news that the pandemic is increasingly declining and that people are increasingly being vaccinated. That news will be coming to you also from the museum, hopefully in the weeks ahead. In the meantime, here you can see this beautiful exhibition behind me, and we are pleased to preview this exhibition that you will see when you come back, Pure, Simple, and Beautiful Forms, Glass from the Collection. This is on view in the Kaplan Ostergaard Glass Gallery. This exhibition has been curated by Catherine Huff, and I would like to thank so much Catherine for working with us on this project. I would like to thank the entire team of the Palm Springs Art Museum, and of course, our Executive Director and CEO, Luis Grachos, and our entire Board of Trustees. Generous support is provided by Angie Gerber and Deborah and Kenneth Novak for this project, this exhibition, and this season's exhibition sponsors are Herman and Faye Sarkowski Charitable Foundation. Funding for this program is made possible in part by the Coweta and Donald Barker Foundation. And a version of this talk with closed captioning will be available on YouTube in the week following this event by clicking CC on your screen on the YouTube site. So I'd like to tell you about this evening's program. First, we will have a virtual tour of this beautiful exhibition with Catherine, and we'll show you what there is in these terrific pieces from our collection. Then Richard is going to discuss his practice. He's one of the artists in our collection and whose work is on view. It's here behind me, and we'll take a look at not only his work in our collection, but also other works from his practice. And then Catherine, Richard, and I will discuss the major themes in the exhibition. We've selected key pieces to highlight, and they each highlight different themes in the exhibition. And Richard is familiar, as is Catherine, with many of these artists personally, knowing not only them as artists, but also their practice and their careers over many years. So we're going to highlight some of their particular works and tell you not only about their working practice, but also about their approach to glass. Finally, of course, we'll take questions from you, and you'll be able to submit those in the chat area, and we will answer your questions about the exhibition. So very briefly, a little bit of bio before we get into the exhibition. Richard Whiteley began working in glass as an artist apprentice in stained glass studio at the age of 16. He then went on to earn an undergraduate degree from the School of Art and Design at the Australian National University and a Master of Fine Arts degree from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Richard is an active artist working in cast glass, and he has had numerous exhibitions in the last 20 years. His work is included in collections around the world, including the Corning Museum of Glass, the National Museum of Scotland, the National Gallery of Australia, and the Shanghai Museum of Glass. There, his first solo exhibition was mounted in 2019. Catherine needs no introduction here in Palm Springs. She was the chief curator at this museum for 43 years. And during that time, she played a major role in the evolution of the museum. I should say she held many positions over 43 years, including being the chief curator. And she has played a major role in the evolution of the museum from being a regional multidisciplinary museum into a nationally and internationally recognized art museum that it is today. She's authored 30 publications and has organized more than 40 art exhibitions, many of which have traveled throughout the United States. We are so happy to have her here. She continues to be actively engaged in Palm Springs, including serving as the vice chair of the City of Palm Springs Historic Site Preservation Board. So with that, I'd like to look at the exhibition, and we'll see a virtual tour of what is here in store for you. So here we have this beautiful exhibition. All of these works are in our collection, and Catherine has chosen them and selected them and installed and presented them. So Catherine, would you like to, you haven't been in the museum for many months. You've been able to see this virtually with us over the last days and recollect these selections. So can you give us your impressions of what you're seeing here?
Well, it's so great to see these photographs. And Rochelle, I want to thank you for inviting me to come back to the museum to serve as a guest curator for this exhibition of glassworks drawn from, the museum's collection of glass. We started working on this exhibition back in the spring of 2020. And that was about 9 months ago. And so Rochelle and I were discussing different themes that we wanted for this exhibition. And she asked me to come up with 3 different themes, which I did. We favored one of the themes over the others because, by May of 2020, our lives were suddenly changing with the strange and unsettling results of the pandemic. By then, we were quarantined at home for days, and then it became weeks, and then it became months. So Rochelle and I agreed that the theme should be pure, simple, and beautiful forms. But by this time, I really just wanted to curl up under the covers and just think about art for art's sakes. I didn't want to think about issues, and I just wanted something very content. So years ago, I remember visiting an exhibition in Tokyo, Japan, that had a similar theme of beautiful forms that were gathered from many different cultures and different regions all over the world and different times, from objects that were from ancient times to the contemporary. And the artworks and objects were in all media. This exhibition made a lasting impression on me that has lingered. And I often, would think about all those pieces. So when I had this opportunity to organize this class show, I thought I would reflect back on that and use a similar unifying curatorial theme that would be healing and meaningful to us during these difficult times. Let's take a couple of looks. Let's take another slide of the gallery.
Absolutely. And let's turn to the next.
Yeah, turn to the next. So for the selection, we selected non-representational works that didn't resemble something really recognizable to people. They were chosen for their beauty through simplification. Next slide. I was thinking about purified and similar aesthetics. Next slide. So confronted with issues of sustainable growth and globalization, this theme seeks essential universal qualities that everyone can share. The tranquil and the lyrical, universal beauty of pure and simple forms appealed to me. And of course, this is my impression of this artwork, and, different curators, different people, they react to artwork, differently. What might mean something to me might not mean it to you. But I was looking at a simpler kind of attitude and lifestyle that was, straightforward, unadorned, modest, and peaceful. Next slide. So these artworks evoke a calmness that encourages us to escape and dream, to cope and heal and mourn, to imagine and create, and inspire us to reconsider the true sources of plenty in our lives. We grouped the 22 works loosely into 6 sub-themes, and we'll discuss specific examples for each a little later in the program. But to keep you lingering with us, I'll tease you with those 6 sub-themes. The first is Home for Solitude, works that provide quiet contemplations and refuge. A second theme is Metaphysical Landscapes. Here we discover the simple beauty and experience of the landscape. And the third section is the cosmos and the moon. These objects offer a sense of wonder about invisible forces. The fourth sub-theme is forms of nature. Artists conceive forms of the natural world in magical ways. The fifth section is Enigma, mysterious forms that seem to harbor secrets or hidden messages. And then the final final theme is geometric forms, objects influenced by natural geometrics or by physical or mathematical concepts, which leads us into Richard's work, because Richard, I put him in the geometric forms. And so what's our next slide?
I think we have one more slide of the exhibition. And
yes.
There's one more beautiful image of some of these fantastic works that you've selected.
Good.
So Catherine, thank you so much for the overview. And this gives everybody a little glimpse as if you're able to walk around the gallery, and soon you will be able to. And with that, I would like to thank you, Catherine, and Richard. We're eager to hear you talk about your work. So Richard's work is behind me here, this beautiful gray piece, and here's a close-up image of it. And Richard, one of the things I want to say as we're starting, and that you've relayed to us over the last weeks of putting together this presentation, is that this work that we have in our collection is from, in a way, represents the evolution of your career, that you have worked more organically and you've worked more structured. And this piece is kind of an apex between those two ends of the spectrum. So as you talk about your practice, I have a feeling that we're going to hear about how this work was so influential kind of as a midpoint in that thinking of your practice. We'll turn it over to you, and we look forward to learning more about your approach.
Thank you, Rochelle, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Catherine. It's lovely to join you here this evening and have the opportunity to tell you a little bit about my work and my process for thinking. This work, Reflector, was gifted to the museum by friends of mine, David Kaplan and Glenn Ostergaard. And I want to just shout out at the beginning of this talk and thank them for the support that they've offered me and many other artists from Australia and around the world. They've made a really strong contribution. So I'm speaking to you tonight from Corning, the Corning Museum of Glass, where I now work. I lived in Australia for most of my career, except for a few years that I studied at the University of Illinois. But I feel very excited to be here. I arrived here just before the pandemic hit, and despite that, navigating that as we all have, I'm excited to be on this side of in this hemisphere. So tonight, I was going to take just a few minutes and talk around this work, Reflector, and some of the works that led up to that, and some of the works that came after that, because it really was at a turning point for the practice. I'd been working in cast glass for about 20 years before I felt that my ideas had started to catch up to the expression within the work. Glass is a very slow material. Working at something for 20 years before you finally start to realize that you're happy with your work it can be quite frustrating. And I kept at it because glass is a pretty extraordinary material. It's kind of sublime transcendence that you can achieve with this medium is really only available. It's one of the few medium that offers that translucency. And it's also, glass can be a bit of a chameleon. It can be raw and heavy, or it can be light and ethereal. And cast glass allows you to move these two qualities together. You know, I really like that dichotomy about the material, and there's those inherent properties of the material are quite unique. Within all of my works, I start with a void first. I actually structure what the whole will be within the work, and then build quite simple geometric forms around that. And so when Rochelle and Catherine contact me about participating in this exhibition and this talk tonight, I was really flattered that Catherine had picked up on that from a curatorial perspective. Those forms, one of the unique properties of the material, of course, is its translucency, its transparency. And what I really enjoy is how an interior void can be read together with an exterior structure. And I can show this probably more directly in the next slide, if we can move to that, please. This is the work called Soma, which was made 3 years before Reflector. It's still the largest work that I've produced. It stands at 70 inches tall. It's in the collection of the museum here, and I'm thrilled that they've been able to put that out on display again. It uses the same principles as the work we were just looking at, you know, some very simple geometry of that outer form built from or interpreted from an I-beam. And like Reflector, it has these interior voided forms, and they create a porthole on that front surface where I see this kind of boundary between the ethereal or the transcendent space and this physical space, as if the void is oozing out into the physical space. If we jump to the next slide. This is a piece that was made, was part of the same exhibition as Reflector, and it's a piece called Subvert. And here is what I was wanting to do is try to give shape to light, attempting to show light as this palpable positive. The negative void within this form is trapped within this rectilinear piece, and it's pushed under by the form. It's subverted through the block of glass and around the edge of the glass where it punctuates through the orifice at the front. Again, that there is this kind of bulge in the lip, and that's all hand carved in. The piece is quite a simple process when it's cast, and then a lot of the detail or really important boundary between that front and the back is carved in by hand, and it's something that I can't always predict in the glass. I've got to visually see it as I'm carving the glass. We can jump to the next slide here. This is a piece called Afterglow, and it was made a couple of years after that body of work we were just looking at. And here you can see there isn't a puncturing of that form, rather than the properties of light create this kind of ethereal halo around the voided form in the back. And then there are these raw marks on the surface that are created with a diamond saw cutting across the surface of the glass. And I'm trying to highlight that ethereal, translucent quality, while at the same time reminding people of this kind of raw quality of the material. And it's that contrast that I think makes this piece work so well. If we can jump to the next slide. Here is a studio image, and it may not look like very much, but this is how I actually visualize the voids. The image on the left there is a piece of, literally it's just downpipe. And I would cut this up and kind of arrange it in my studio, would do many iterations of this, take photographs of it or build clay around it. What I'm trying to visualize there is what the void in the piece will be. And then the clay gets built around that, and that is what the glass will be. Over the years, I've started using softer materials, actually structuring voids out of clay itself, or using cardboard or other things to try and visualize that. And as I've done that, the works have taken on a more asymmetry or a softness. We go to the next image. And here you see an image of a human heart and an image of raw mold materials. And another approach that I've taken is literally taking images like this, images from the body, working more directly with the body, and then drawing them onto these refractory materials and then literally just hand carving them. That form then becomes the whole within the glass. I actually build an exterior form and then cast the glass around that. Partly that's, you can, if you jump to the next slide, you can see that more directly here, where this interior form was a piece of refractory material that was all cut by hand, and then it was bolted into a rectilinear block. The glass was cast around it, and then you see on the left-hand side of the glass there, this kind of puckering out of the form. That's all carved in afterwards to give you this sense of this transition, as if this interior void is starting to affect the exterior work. Partly this body of work was an interest in the human body and our relationship to our own body. And part of it was, I think intuitively, I spent a lot of time with doctors over the last 5 or 10 years, helping my parents through the latter part of their life, just before they passed, and looking at a lot of scans of their body. And before I knew it, I had started to realize these elements as part of my work. But I also think there is reference to the body back in the works like Reflector and like Soma. If we jump to the next slide, you can see this work here, Absence. It's a very, that interior form is fully formed at the time that the work is cast, but the exterior of that piece, all those punctuations, the way it pushes out of that rectilinear form, that's all done by hand afterwards. So I can get a sense of how the optics are working and what the work needs. So this work and the next work, if we jump to that, these works were part of my first museum exhibition at the Shanghai Museum of Glass, and they're now with Hampson Gallery. And Corey Hampson flew to Shanghai to work with the gallery and also secure these works for representation. If we jump to the last one, this is me in my old studio in Canberra, Australia, just before I moved here. And what I've always been very passionate about is trying to make works at scale. I think cast glass at scale is a very powerful and exciting medium. I was very fortunate to study with Lubinsky and Praktova at Pilchuck Glass School when I was a kid. And I was very inspired by the medium and certainly their approach. But I'd also say that cast glass is, as I said earlier, very challenging medium to work in. There isn't a lot of shared knowledge. People don't actually share a lot of information about it. And one of the reasons I've come to the museum here is what we're trying to do is to build a cast glass research center where artists can come in and realize their works. And so that's all on hold at the moment during the pandemic, but we're hoping to get back to that very soon. Anyway, I'll hand it back to you, Rochelle.
Thank you. So Richard, thank you so much for this overview of your work, a very brief glimpse, a brief artist talk, but more to come as this unfolds. But I do want to just ask you a question before we move on. One thing that seems so fascinating to me is that many of these works have the kind of range of translucency to opacity that you would imagine in glass, but the work Subvert is a real surprise to me when I saw it because of the blue and the color coming in. And so I just wanted to take a moment before we move on and start to look at other works in this exhibition, which do include so much color, different color. If you could talk about that decision to integrate that beautiful blue tone and how you went about that, because certainly is important in glass.
It really is. And thank you, Rochelle, for picking up on that. It's hard to cover all those issues in such a short talk, but I work very closely with Bullseye Glass on the development of colors, and quite often it isn't like this is the color I'm looking for. I'm looking for more kind of emotive qualities. These kind of it's so easy for color to overpower form, and I want the color to have a presence and a power, but I don't want it to take over the conversation. And when I was younger, I made lots of very expensive mistakes, casting quite big things that were either opaque. You know, if they didn't crack, you know, they were opaque, or the color was way too bright. And over the years, you just need the subtlest amount of color to really capture a form. And there is often the case that color changes with thickness. So on the piece you're looking at on the screen here, it's got this kind of deep, this kind of powdery blue color to it. But as you get thicker, it has a purple hue to it. So even in the thinner parts, as the light is bouncing around in the material, you'll get kind of glimpses of a purple and other colors mixing together. So even they are, you know, monochromatic, they also have these layers of colors that is a property of the glass making process.
Thank you so much for talking about that, because I know that we're going to be looking at some works that do use different kinds of color, and we can talk about how that's come about in the practice and the process. So thank you, Richard, so much for this introduction and in-depth introduction, actually, into your practice. With that, I think we'll move into looking some more at the show and hearing your commentary, as well as, of course, Catherine. So as Catherine noted, there are these different sections of the exhibition. And so we're going to dive into one or two examples that we've selected, Catherine and Richard and I, with particular focus on the range of making, also a range of artists from around the world, and also with some special interest because Catherine and Richard do know some of these artists personally and have spent time either, in Richard's case, as a mentor and as a professor of some of these people. So we are very fortunate. Catherine also has spent much time as a curator working with them. So let's dive in. Catherine, would you like to take us through these sections?
Sure. So our first section is Home for Solitude. And if we can have the next slide. So Home for Solitude, to me, these are objects that channel simple beauty and provide people with quiet contemplation and a sense of a spiritual refuge. Through these objects, I sense the beauty of life and the beauty in the world. And I understand what it is meant for Home for Solitude. We've spent so much time in our homes, and I myself have found great beauty in our garden and in objects in our home. So this is a work by Naomi Shaoya, who's a Japanese artist. This work is titled Roof Garden. It's cast glass. And Naomi is a graduate of Japan's first glass program at Tama Art University. Her cast glass sculpture is inspired by her daily life and surroundings, such as this roof garden. She wrote poetry to help crystallize her ideas and her thoughts. So I'd like to read a very short poem that accompanies this work. So I will begin. We can relax on this roof garden. They aren't here. Tired wanderers. Green young men. Ladies loud talking. We can relax only here. So this poem is a traditional Japanese tanka that describes emotions, feelings, thoughts by using common places like this peaceful roof garden. So now we're going to move on to the next slide. And this section is Metaphysical Landscapes. Next slide. The simple beauty of landscape is something to be discovered. We all look at landscape in different ways. You know, you wake up in the morning and you look at the landscape or the ocean or the mountains or the sky. So within these artworks, there's a curious balance between matter and form that pose questions regarding the nature of beauty, you know, how we perceive beauty in space. This first work is by Kobe Cockburn, who's an Australian. This work is called In Steel. It's a kiln-formed and cold-worked glass piece. In an artist statement about her work, Kobe says, and I'd like to quote her statement, "The quiet landscape, a feeling, a space with distance and memory, both spiritual and physical, a place of meaning, that's my own story," unquote. So Kobe captures the quiet beauty of the natural environment in her unique, almost two-dimensional flat works that have a great amount of depth when you're actually in front of them. Kobe's a graduate of the Australian National University School of Art in Canberra. And Richard, wasn't she one of your students?
Yeah, poor Kobe was a student with me twice. She had to endure 2 degrees with me, one at Sydney College of the Arts as an undergraduate student, and then her honours degree at the ANU, the School of Art and Design in Canberra, Australia. And it was, I mean, she was a very talented student in both programs, but it was that 1 year honours program, which is the equivalent of a BFA here. She took this incredible leap in her practice, and it was that just putting the time into to undertake the research. She came into the program being inspired by Indigenous basket weavers and developed the cane pulling practice that she constructed these slumped forms, which were quite innovative pieces in of themselves. And then she finished her degree. That took quite a bit of time to do that. And then it was subsequent to her degree that she developed this landscape body of work, which is sublime. They are extraordinary works. And the museum has a lovely piece in the one that's on the screen now.
Good. Thank you. So I'd like to show another example of the metaphysical landscape. This is a work by Emma Varga, and it's called Ruby Red Sky #2. And Emma Varga, she lives in Sydney now, Sydney, Australia, and she tells this incredible story. When she was literally fleeing and escaping her homeland in the former Yugoslavia during political unrest in 1995. She absolutely had to run away. And she said that while she was on that, she made it to an airplane, she got on the airplane, and she said while she was on the airplane and she was en route to Australia, and she was just waking up from a nap after being absolutely exhausted and stressed out. And she looked out the window of the airplane and she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She saw a magnificent sunset over the red center with its vast, dusty red terrain. The colors of the Australian landscapes with the vibrant reds, the incredible clear blues, luscious greens, made a lasting impression on her and continued to be a great source of inspiration for her work today. Also, she expresses that this new sense of freedom being in Australia and away from what she was running from, it greatly gave her a sense of freedom, greatly influenced the way that she could work. She was free to express herself in her own unique way and approach her art in new ways. So Emma has perfected her complicated technique. We did visit her studio and she tried to explain to us how she fused and cast multiple layers of glass sheets and the powders that she used. And so, Richard, I thought you might explain a little bit more and summarize maybe her process and how does she achieve these incredible sculptures?
Yeah, she's an amazing individual, designer in the former Yugoslavia, a refugee, political refugee of the war, and lands in Australia. I bumped into her on the street in 1995 when she just arrived, and we had this fast conversation about working in glass. And to see her practice, to go from a designer who doesn't necessarily work with the material to becoming so articulate with this this kiln forming process, and so original in a country that is known for kiln forming and known for its originality. I just think it's a remarkable story. there's a whole series of processes that she goes through to realize these works. A series of pre-firings where she's making smaller elements and then layering them and constructing them together. Depending on the work that she's doing, she will do hundreds of elements and then incorporate them as she builds up like 5 or 6 firings to create one work. And then there's the laborious process of cold working. And she has quite a different approach to doing that. She did a whole Antarctic series after this work, after this body of work, and developed a whole series of other techniques to realize these forms. Her, like Kobe, are working in kiln forming glass, and they're developing techniques to realize their ideas that they have in their heads. And I just think I have a lot of credit for the innovation in both of their practices.
Thank you. So our next sub-theme is cosmos and the moon and whatever else is out there, maybe even Mars. Mars is in the news today. So these are forms that captivate us and pose questions about energy and the vitality of life. These next objects renew a sense of wonder about invisible forces that exist and stir up these incredible feelings of awe that we have. And with the next slide is get the Japanese pronunciation correct here, Masahiro Asaka, and this is called Surge. And Asaka creates these incredible sculptures that provide a very delicate balance between his desire to control the material and the forces of nature that cannot be controlled. He employs a technique where the outcome is often unpredictable. He captures and he visualizes a frozen moment of glass when it's interacting with forces such as heat, energy, gravity, which affect the sculpture's formation. It's one of the most amazing pieces that we have in our collection, and his work is, just so complicated. And Richard, was he also one of your students?
Yeah.
And can you tell us about his incredible processes? It's so complicated.
Yeah, he migrated from Japan originally to Sydney to work for the artists there, Ben Edels and Kathy Elliott, and he was a studio assistant for them for many years. And as he was doing that, he always wanted to get back to his own work, and so he enrolled in a master's program with us. And one of the things he wanted to do was to show the nature of glass. Well, that's difficult because glass is this chameleon. It can be so many different things. And he found that by basically crushing the glass, embedding it in these molds, and then as the mold is being cast, he goes into the kiln in a fire suit and tilts the mold. So you get this oozing effect to try and show the kind of fluidity and the compacting of the material. He worked for almost 2 years just to arrive at a technique that captured his ideas. And the results are stunning. The failure rates are off the charts. He really, would cast many of them before he'd find one that he was happy with, even using the same mold. Just a few degrees difference, a little bit longer holding time, the sintering of the glass. All these factors are things that it happens in a kiln, in a box, and it's shut, and you can't see into the mold. So he has to wait until it's out of the kiln and then pull it all apart and see what he's got and what he can work with. A very slow process, but breathtaking results.
I mean, the one thing I just wanted to say about this piece that I find so fascinating is it's called Surge. And so on the one hand, you kind of feel the surge of the material, but at the same time, it's almost like it's freeze frame frozen. in terms of the way the glass feels fluid, but is just kind of stopped there in time. And it's right here to the side of me, and it's so delicate. It's on the one hand very robust in the center, and it feels quite geometric and solid in some of the ways that, Richard, you were describing your work. But then the edges are incredibly fragile, and it's almost like cotton candy spindles at the end. And so it's so interesting how this one piece can have this spectrum of glass process within it.
Mm. He's one of the finest cold workers on the planet. And although you wouldn't know it by looking at this work, it looks so raw, but
Yes.
those fine spindles are all very delicately refined so they don't cut you.
Yes. Yes, it's just, it's really, when you come, everybody come to see the show, you'll be able to see it here, and you'll marvel, I think, at the fine work that went into this.
Amazing. Another piece in the cosmos, with the next slide, we're looking at this wonderful piece called Saturno by Lino Tagliapietra, who's Italian. And I would say that Lino is the greatest living glassblower of our time. There's an incredible story about Lino. And in 1979, he shared the secret Italian glass blowing techniques to a group of young and wild students at the then new Pilchuck Glass School in the state of Washington. Lino came from Italy, didn't speak any English. Wonderful story about what happened to his tools on the airplane, but he went to Washington to demonstrate glass blowing to these young artists, and the young artists were like names that are very famous now, like Dale Chihuly, Benjamin Moore, William Morris, and many more, who are well-known glassblowers today. So in Lino's own work, he combines techniques rooted in the 1,000-year-old Venetian glass-making tradition, but yet he brings fresh and contemporary creative ways to expand the potential of glass as a sculptural medium. And we've shown his work a lot at our museum. We had a big, huge retrospective several years ago, and Rochelle just presented his work just recently.
Well, it's true. We're so lucky to have this ongoing relationship with Lino. He does live in Italy, but he does also love Palm Springs. And we were lucky to have him here just last year. Yes, it was last February, right before we had to close the museum, and also to present his film. But it was wonderful to show then his more recent work. And we're just so fortunate to have this work in our collection. He is a master, and we do have this ongoing relationship with Lino and his family.
So our next subtitle is Forms of Nature. And these are, we included artists that conceive forms of the natural world through, their curvy lines inspired by germination and growth, either on the land or the sea, as seen in the sculpture by the next slide of Vladimira Kumplar, who's an American born in Czech Republic. And this is called Sea Subject, and a beautiful color too. Kumplar studied at the renowned Academy of Applied Arts in Prague. under Professor Stanislav Lubinsky, who Richard said he studied with for a while. And Lubinsky, very important Czech Republic professor who was a mentor to, I guess, about 3 generations of artists, including American artist Karen Lamont, whose life-size glass dress is also in the museum's collection. And maybe it's on exhibit in another gallery. I don't know, Rochelle could tell us, but it's not included in this show, but I wanted to mention her work. So Klumpar, she's built on Lubinsky's concepts of color and light and this optical geometry, but very organic as well. She creates large cast sculptures with amazing mystical optics and mass, and you know, such as this sea subject. Really incredible work. So the next subtitle is Enigma. This is kind of my favorite subtitle because it contains the mysterious forms. These forms, they seem to conceal secrets or hidden messages, very intriguing works that invite meditation, contemplation, kind of deciphering what's going on here. This sub-theme invites us into an atmosphere of wonderment and discovery, especially in the next work by Jessica Lachlan. It's called Visible Distance 2. And Jessica Lachlan, she portrays the inherent quiet and stillness of the Australian landscape. In viewing this work in person, one can actually feel and experience the environment, you know, the vast space where the boundary between air and water and ground are blurred. She portrays stillness rather than the image of a landscape that we're, you know, familiar with. She portrays an emotion, a feeling. One feels the sense of space. There's no activity, no images, no noise, just light, land, water, and sky. You can't see that in this photograph on this screen because I don't think you can capture, because it's so environmental. You can't photograph a feeling. And you really have to stand in front of this piece and kind of, you know, walk around it a little bit because it moves and shimmers and totally envelops you with emotion. Jessica earned her degree at the Australian National University School of Art and is another student of Richard's.
Actually,
amazing.
Actually, she was not.
She wasn't. She's not your
No. She studied under, importantly, she studied under
Klaus?
not Klaus, Stephen Proctor, who was the second head of workshop.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And Stephen graduated Giles Bettison, Jessica Lachlan, Mel Douglas from her undergraduate degree, many significant artists. I will say of Jess Lachlan, she's much younger than me, but she's probably the artist that I've taken the most inspiration from. As far as her methodology, her approach, her research approach to her practice is the best I've ever seen. She is so thorough with her interrogation of ideas. The way she steps through ideas within her practice is inspirational. And I'm often, when I'm speaking to students, citing her research practice as literally the best I've seen. I'm teaching a class that's coming up for the museum here, an online class about ideas and about how to develop ideas. And of course, I've reached out to Jessica and asked her to be a visiting lecturer for that class.
Wow, those lucky students of yours to have this experience.
And me too.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention the pieces. I can see it out of the corner of my eye from where I'm seated here in the gallery, and it's just incredibly ethereal. So when you come to see it, absolutely, it will captivate you. And unfortunately, the picture doesn't do it justice, but the tonality of it and the kind of enigmatic quality, as Catherine noted, is definitely embedded into this work. It is, on the one hand, very, very rectilinear, and on the other hand, it has this kind of hazy cloudiness within it that I think gives it its mystery. So you'll look forward to seeing it when you're here.
Yeah, absolutely. So our last subtitle is Geometric Forms. And you learned about Richard's geometric forms. His work is included in this subtitle. And this is where physical or mathematical concepts stimulate artists to create, abstract geometrical forms in imaginative ways. And so the last slide I'm going to show you is work by John Kiley, who's an American. And this is called, it's interesting title, Squeezed Precocious Overlap. And John Kiley, American, is a native of Seattle, and he began his studies at the Pilchuck Glass School, who I mentioned earlier. And he worked as a gaffer for Dale Chihuly for many years, and was a principal, or is perhaps still a principal member of Lino Tagliapiatra's team for many, many years. And this work is blown glass that is carved and polished and fused together. Kiley's sculptures are a keen exploration of the external space, the internal forms, and a nice study of shadow, reflection, color, and light. A really wonderful piece to walk around and explore visually. Visually. No touching in the gallery. We placed this piece on the pedestal in such a way to allow the viewer to be able to peer into the opening and through the form to see where the distinct colored sections are fused together and become become one form. So this is the last slide of works from the subtitles, and which concludes kind of my overview of the exhibition and the selection of individual artists. And we should move on now, Rochelle, for
Yes.
comments and questions
Thank you so much. So absolutely. First, I'd like to thank you both for your incredible insights into all these works of art, and into, Richard, your practice. At this point, if people have questions, please do write them in the area of the chat. And while you're taking a moment to do that, I would like to thank you, Catherine, for curating the show. For continuing to show your dedication to our glass collection. I'd also like to note that when we reopen the gallery, there will be information on our website about these individual pieces, which we're building right now, and also about the various techniques of how these works have been made, which Richard has been so helpful in illuminating to us. And glass is, of course, a very, very complex medium. And we're so thankful to be able to help to share that with the public, because I know there are often a lot of questions about how are things made. So, Richard, while we're gathering questions here, and I know Yesenia will read them to us, I just wanted to ask you, as a maker, Can you tell us about your experimentation? You talked a little bit about it in your overview of your practice, but there's such a range of different ways of approaching glass. And I'm wondering if you can talk about your experimentation. Have you tried different approaches and said, this is not for me? Do you feel the enthusiasm of failure? Can you talk about that? You discussed it a little bit about some of these works and how inherent failure is in the practice. Can you talk to us about that? Because it must be both exhilarating and frustrating at the same time.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think personality tracks certain processes. Like, I loved glass blowing when I learned that as a young person, but I was drawn to cast glass, I think partly because of some experiences I had as a young boy. I worked, I was a volunteer altar boy I think when I was about 13. And I can remember trying to keep awake while and I would do that by looking at the colored stained glass on the floor. And then I was in high school and someone came into the high school and said, we were doing a stained glass class, and the guy gave us a lecture and showed us contemporary glass. And I'm like, this is incredible. And he said at the end of the talk, I'm looking for an apprentice. I just put my hand up and dropped out of school and did that because that is what I wanted to do. I didn't even know it was a thing before that lecture. So that quality of light through glass was something that I found really compelling. And I also think I really like to work at things. I like to put time into it and am quite patient at working through things. Whereas, a glass blower, they work with the material very directly. They take a long time to build up their skills, but it's much more immediate because of a cause and effect. With cast glass, there's a lot of denial and a lot of delayed satisfaction. And I think that goes to my kind of a certain mentality. I've seen, like my friend Heike Brocklow, who's a very well-known caster, we have kind of similar personality traits. We're kind of really stubborn and we're, persistent, like get out. Like we'll just work at something all day, all night until we get it right. So I think it's a great question, and I think there's certainly a psychological test that you can do that self-selects people into different areas of practice.
It's so fascinating because within the medium of glass, which itself is so complex, there is such a different range of approaches. And so that is so fascinating that perhaps different approaches find different people by personality. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. I can see that there's some questions coming in. So Yesenia is going to help us by fielding those questions to us. Thank you so much, Yesenia, for that.
Thank you so much, Richard, Catherine, and Rochelle, for this great presentation. Our first question is for both Rochelle and Catherine. Can you both speak about the museum's history with collecting glass, and especially the glass in the collection itself?
Well, Catherine can do that better than I can, because not only has she been involved with the museum much, much longer, but she was instrumental to the starting of this collection. So I'm going to turn that over to Catherine.
Okay. So, well, our very first beginning of glass was actually in the 1980s. We had an exhibition of Dale Chihuly, which was very early in his work, and then it followed with an exhibition of artists that were at Pilchuck Glass School in the state of Washington. And it was a wonderful survey that showed the diversity of glass, and it was such a popular exhibition. I believe that must have been in the 1980s too. And our community just responded very, very well to that exhibition. It was very, very popular and wanted more. So we started having glass exhibitions. We didn't have too much glass in our collection, but we started having more shows, big solo shows. Like we had William Morris's, I think the largest exhibition that he ever had. He transformed our Annenberg Art Wing into the most incredible galleries of glass, monumental, fabulous. And we had a bigger, Dale Chihuly show, and we had Jenny Ruffner retrospective. We had that big Lino, and on and on. And then collectors started paying attention to our museum, and we started, cultivating donors to donate artwork to the museum and to establish a glass center at the museum. And David Kaplan and Glenn Ostegard were instrumental in providing those foundations for establishing a glass gallery, and to solicit other donors to help fund that and provide funds for exhibitions. And we've had one after the other, and really stimulated a lot of growth in our museum. And there are many collectors in the desert, and we're looking for, fabulous, like I say, we, as a member of the community, we're looking forward to substantial growth of the museum with, excellent fine pieces. But it's been, quite a few years and very well received.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for that history that you've been so much a part of. It's really wonderful to see the collection and to see these highlights here. Thank you. Yesenia, I think there's some more questions coming in.
Yes, there is. Our next question is based on Shigoya's artwork that was presented in the presentation. They wanted to know a little bit more about the poem that presided the artwork as well.
Well, first, I just wanted to mention that I love that poem, so I'm glad that was asked. We do feature Artwork of the Week every week. As many people know, we've been doing that since the pandemic started, and I think we've done it for, I think we were told 45 weeks now. So that piece was actually featured as one of our Artworks of the Week. We're so fond of that incredible work, and the poem appears with that Artwork of the Week. So it is on our website if anybody's interested in the text itself. And Catherine, when you started thinking about this exhibition, I think that was one of the first pieces that we gravitated to. I think we both really, really liked that work, and also this idea of the home, and that it's like a mini world within a world. So I don't know if there's anything more that you wanted to add in terms of how you feel about that piece, or Richard, your response to having looked at it and seen it now in the context of this collection of glass.
Well, I do want to add that Naomi was very much touched by the refugees that were coming into Europe, and kind of touched by all those people and where they were going to go, and where their homes were, and I think this poem relates a little bit to her feeling about those refugees, because she says, we can relax on this roof garden. They aren't here. Tired wanderers, green young men. I don't think she means the color green, but maybe young men. Ladies loud talking. We can relax only here. So it might relate to that experience that she observed.
Richard, can you tell us anything about that piece in terms of the technique, or it's incredibly beautiful, and the opacity, but also the pillars?
Yeah, certainly. I don't know Naomi, but when I saw the work for the first time, I said it looks like Shibuya's work, who's a very well-known caster, but he did not teach at Tama that I'm aware of. He taught at Toyama, which he's now the director of the new museum there. but then I saw on her resume that she was a studio assistant for Shibuya for many years. So I can see that kind of aesthetic connection. There's a subtlety about, I mean, the Japanese developed a studio glass community kind of parallel to Australia. They're very successful and they have their own aesthetic and their own approach. Casting is something, I'm a bit of an outlier in Australia. There's not a lot of casters, mainly kiln formers and glass blowers. But in Japan, casting, pat the bear, they say pat the bear, as in patting the bear, is a very popular technique. So her work is a combination of casting, and it looks like granulated glass. So it's a little bit pat the bear casting that she's worked together.
Thank you. I think there's one more question, and from what I can tell, it relates a bit to what you just said, so it's a good follow-on.
Yes, our last question is for Richard. They ask if you can speak a little bit more about the history of glass work and glass art in Australia, excuse me. It seems there's a robust history going on.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Rachel. On one hand, there isn't a history of glassmaking in Australia. There's no industry. It's not like Europe. But I think a few things happened in Australia, and a lot of it is around timing and making good decisions early. So the Australia Council is like the NEA here, except it's well funded proportionally considering the size of Australia. And they saw the early experimentation of studio glass artists in the United States, and they said, this is really exciting. Let's see if we can seed glassworking in Australia. So they invited Dick Marcus and Bill Boyson to travel Australia. This was back in the 1970s. And they invited Dick Marcus to build a traveling mobile hot shop and travel around the country. And he said, that's a terrible idea. I'd never do it. But he did come back and visit a few universities and set up programs, and glass really took hold within those programs. Most of them became strong programs for glass. Bill Boyson came and did the traveling mobile program. And then Canberra had a kind of a Bauhaus model, and it was run by a director called Udo Salbach. And he had already hired a number of European masters in other fields, printmaking, furniture, and gold and silver. And he wanted to build glass. And he looked around the world, and I believe they offered the job to Dick Marcus, who said no. And then they reached out to a guy called Klaus Moyet, who came to Australia, and the timing was perfect. I mean, glass was starting to get going there. And he brought a vision of not only what was happening in Europe and all those traditional skills, but he was well connected to America. He was actually at Pilchuck in 1979 in that summer with Lino Telepietra. And he sat up the back with Lino, and they're like, these Americans, they don't know anything. But they saw in America the future because of this energy. And Australia had that same energy. And we needed someone to really be a lightning rod for that energy. Klaus, I believe, was that lightning rod. He really helped drive that professionalism, just as places like Pilchuck and others drove that, kind of became that lightning rod for glass in America. So we didn't have a long history, but we were just lucky, I think. We got some good people at the right time, and it all just kind of flowed from there.
That's fascinating, and it's so fantastic for us to have your perspective on this as a participant in it, and then also your trans-Atlantic or trans-Pacific connection to now that you're at Corning, and that you can see it from different vantage points, and that you also have this perspective on our collection as it has been built up over time. So with that, I would like to thank you both so much for this fascinating evening and this incredible exploration of glass, artwork, techniques, and of our collection. And we're really honored to be able to have time with both of you. Thank you, Catherine, again, for curating this exhibition, for exploring our collection with us, and Richard, for being with us. We know it's late on the East Coast, so thank you for this dedication to time. And with that, I would like to just remind everybody that if you would like to watch this again, or if you would like to tell others, this link is available on our website. And please look at our website. In the upcoming days, we will be announcing upcoming future programs, and we will continue to have virtual programs. And we look forward to welcoming you back here at the museum. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.